make it clear. Order. Well, I did not make the comment.
Bill is not about taking away rights. It is about giving opportunity.
Good, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Citizen A, where we wrap the week's current affairs with a panel of bloggers and opinion shapers. Joining me tonight, here's a former Green Party MP, human rights activist and blogger, Keith Locke, and she is from New Zealand's largest feminist blog, The Hand Mirror, commentator, local board representative and blogger, Julie Fairey. Welcome to you both. Coming up tonight, issue 1, poll die for Shearer, what are Labour doing wrong? And what are the Greens doing so right? Issue 2. Would a New Zealand first supported GCSB bill be the worst possible outcome for civil liberties in New Zealand? And issue 3 tonight is the U-turn on the inner city rail loop, a recognition Wellington can't fight Auckland. Plus, we'll end the show on a final word, but let's kick things off tonight with issue 1. David Shearer's leadership of the New Zealand Labour Party hit new wobbles this week with the release of the Herald Digipoll, seeing Labour plummet by 5.5%. The good news is that it's the Herald Digipoll that farcically predicted the Brown-Banks-Mayoralty race was neck and neck, and 11.9% of those polled didn't know who they wanted to vote for. So the Herald Digipoll's results need to be taken with a quarry full of salt. The bad news, however, is that with John Key's government managing to self-mutilate themselves on an almost weekly basis, there's never been so much sunshine for Labour to make hay from. Julie, last time you were on the show, you said there was little chance of a leadership move against David Shearer, but polls like this must be spooking some Labour Party MPs into wondering if Shearer has the mustard to beat Key. What's going wrong?
I think part of what we're seeing is that it's about the party, not the policy, first off. And I think one of the things that worries me is that people in Labour will get nervous about their policy.
Right.
Some of their policy is pretty good now.
Very good, very good.
And so I think they need to not get spooked, not allow themselves to get spooked by people who will say, maybe if you tweaked this policy, maybe if you, ditched the capital gains tax, that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So they need to stay firm on that stuff. In terms of the party stuff, that's really where the problem is. And I think the 12% undecided, the fact that, the left bloc as a whole isn't growing. It's just moving around between Greens and, also with the ascendancy of Peters, that always takes votes off Labour as well. So there needs to be that breakthrough to really grow the left bloc of votes, I think.
Is there a frustration from Labour's activists that you've got policy now that makes sense, that actually has solutions to the problems the country is looking forward to, and yet for some reason, because of a personnel issue, it's just not resonating with New Zealanders?
I don't know that it is entirely a personnel issue. I mean, Clark went through years of being not particularly popular before she became one of the most popular prime ministers we ever had, you know. And I also think history will look very kindly on her as well. So, I don't know what it is. If I knew what it was, I'd be telling everybody I know in the Labour Party.
Is Shearer's appearances in the media to date, let's be honest, they're not fantastic. And even after, the initial real bad wobbles, he's still not making that cut through. You can still see hesitation in his face when he's answering questions.
I think he could do better.
Yep.
But I think that we have seen flashes of that. We have seen flashes of the potential.
Yep, we have.
There was a speech he gave at one point, and unfortunately I can't even remember what it was about, so I suppose that shows some problem.
Yep.
But that was just, his delivery was fantastic. He nailed it.
Yep.
And I guess I'm just wondering about, maybe with the smaller caucus, it's hard for him to find the time to give that attention to being the leader outside the caucus.
Well, somebody needs to start giving it to him, right?
Maybe there's some stuff like that.
Keith, Shearer is in power because of factional manoeuvring within caucus, not because he has widespread party support. Where's the tipping point here? If they go under 30%, is that the point?
I can't point to a tipping point right now. The Australian example shows that there could be a change of leader even like very close to the election if people feel their jobs are at risk, and enough MPs feel that way. I would agree with Julie though. I think the problem is more with the party. And I disagree with Julie. I think there is a policy problem. There's still too much of a centrist approach of Labour and too much accommodation to the business establishment, defence establishment, intelligence establishment, etc.
Do you think the Greens can push Labour on that when you had such a massive U-turn from Russell himself on quantitative easing, which he did actually win the intellectual argument over, but was too frightened to go ahead with it, and they took it off the table.
Yeah, it's still there in green policy, I think, but it's downplayed a bit now. The Greens still have more of the cutting-edge policies, be it climate change, be it on the economy as well, in terms of some of the restructuring the Reserve Bank, etc. Whereas if you think now, what's Labor's economic policy that's different from National? It's often hard to come up with for ordinary people to come up with an answer.
Sure.
And I think that the sort of accommodation to the business establishment shown by the Labor MPs going along to the Sky City corporate box.
It doesn't help. It doesn't help when the biggest, most vocal supporters of David Shearer are Fran O'Sullivan, Matthew Hooton, David Farrar, the entire Herald editorial team, and Whale Oil. That doesn't help.
I know from being an MP, they really try and capture with all these cocktail parties and corporate boxes and everything else, and praise you and all the rest of it. They didn't do quite so much of that with me.
I'm sure they didn't.
I could see it sort of working, and you've got to be quite strong to.
Julie, how does Labor retake the momentum here? Because they are the opposition. They are supposed to be the opposition.
That's right.
How do they retake the momentum?
I'm really hopeful that the by-election result will give them a bit of heart this weekend.
Now, where do they need to win? What's their margin? They've got to win by over 1,000, surely.
I don't know, because I feel like with the Māori electorate, it's a bit of a different world to me. And so I'm always reticent to give any opinions on them because I don't understand the dynamics that work there. There's iwi allegiances, there's hapu stuff, there's iwi organisations. It's
but if
very
it's under 1,000, they've lost the major numbers to Mana and Greens. That's not going to help them momentum-wise next year in those Māori elections.
Well, I think there's another thing we need to look at there, which is that this is a bunch of terrific candidates.
Yes.
The parties have all put up people who are strong, who know their issues, and who are campaigning well.
No slouches.
No, and I think I'm particularly excited about Marama Davidson.
She's an amazing candidate.
And I would really like to see her as someone that the Greens embrace and get her into Parliament on their list.
Keith, let's talk about the Greens. They are miles ahead of any other political party in their mastery of social media. They are future-proofing their vote. Is 15% of the next election a genuine possibility for them?
I think so, and I think just bit by bit you see the Greens growing in public credibility. It's shown in the polls, but it's also shown, when you talk around to people, they're more comfortable than the Greens.
Marama Davidson, an amazing candidate.
Yeah, she's a great candidate with quite a bit of experience, not in terms of running elections.
Would we see her in the top 10 on the party list?
I don't know whether it'll be the top 10, but it'd be fairly high up, I would imagine.
Was it smart money for David Shearer to rule Russell Norman out as finance minister? Surely it's whether or not Russell Norman wants him to be the prime minister, isn't it?
That's the sort of arrogance that Labor often shows. You work out the division of spoils and ministerial positions after the election when you've worked out the numbers. If the Greens get 15% and Labor gets 27%,
they're not really in much of a position to be wagging their finger. Right.
You've got to negotiate accordingly.
Final question to both of you. Is the Australian Labor Party's own leadership coup unfortunate timing for David Shearer? It doesn't help, does it?
Well, I think it's long been recognised that the Australian Labor Party is pretty dysfunctional and factionalised. And that it's not a role model for the New Zealand Labor Party in any way, shape or form. They kind of make the New Zealand Labor Party look like a unified front. Yeah, and also, I disagree with some of Gillard's politics, but the gender aspect to that has been huge.
Do you think it's been quite sexist?
Oh, totally. All of the stuff about the knitting. I mean, the lady genuinely knits in her spare time. Why are we even talking about it? It's not even relevant. And yet people are like, oh, she's being like Madame Defarge at the guillotine and all of this kind of stuff. It's just a photo of her knitting.
Australian Labor Party, does it give New Zealand Labor Party some ideas?
Well, they're pretty quick with the knives over there, and one of the problems with the New Zealand Labor Party too is it tends to be a bit too oppositional times without the political substance. Like Trevor Mallard
just likes to have it go at anything.
Really smashing done over the. You've got to give your money back over this non-registration of United Future. When in fact the problem with United Future is they won't accept internet membership, and you just go to the Labor Party website and you sign up over the internet. You don't need a signature. And Labor's really attacking itself there.
Yes, calm down, Trev. Thank you, panel. Moving on with our second issue tonight. It's been damned by the Law Commission, legal academics, human rights and civil liberties groups, and no explanation other than the ridiculous claim to be protecting weapons of mass destruction have been kite flown as justifications. Yet the GCSB bill, legalising the spying on New Zealanders, looks like it will pass with the support of Gasp, Horror, New Zealand First. Keith, New Zealand First aren't shy about being reactionary knee-jerks. Is them teaming up with National the worst-case scenario for New Zealand civil liberties?
I think the worst-case scenario is the present bill, and I think that any amendments that Winston Peters forces will probably be in a good direction. He's talking about a broader panel of people to look at the warrants
from
and
2 to 3.
Only minor things probably. But Winston Peters is in a tricky situation because a lot of his political base, he's naturally in favour of the intelligence services and sort of hard on security and asylum seekers and all the rest of it. So he's hard right on that. But on the other hand, his nationalist populist voting base is often, in the conspiracy theory sort of mould and worried about big states.
These intelligence agencies aren't answering to Wellington; they're answering to Washington. I mean, his base have got every reason to be concerned.
That's the problem, and I think that's shown with the Snowden revelations that the NSA is out of control in terms of its surveillance of phone calls, the internet, and everything else. And the story that needs to be told, the issue that needs to be discussed, is the GCSB's relationship with the NSA, particularly in the light of the revelations that the NSA has been spying on China, the interviews that have been given to the South China Morning Post on the hacking of Chinese communications, and then the intercept of mobile telephone networks in China. And the GCSB, through Waihopai, is helping the NSA spying on China, whether consciously or not. It's providing the data from these communication satellites that it draws down the communications from into Waihopai. It's handing that data over to the NSA to filter according to its own selectors, as they call them. Now, there's a certain blindness here that they think, well, perhaps the Chinese won't notice and perhaps they won't worry. Well, we just need to read the editorial in the People's Daily a few days ago in Beijing, viciously attacking the NSA for what it's doing, and what's in the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong and all these things, that the Chinese know exactly that the GCSB is helping the NSA spy on China. This is our major trading partner. So something's got to break there.
Julie, Winston took out Dunn to be National's only viable coalition partner. This is New Zealand First, manoeuvring to the right. Do New Zealanders need to appreciate in the next election a vote for New Zealand First is a vote for John Key?
Well, I think it will be really interesting to see how that plays out, because whenever Winston has had a choice, he has actually gone home again,
hasn't he,
to the National Party. And people do need to be very aware of that. And we have such short political memories in New Zealand. That torturous wait after the 96 election, we waited and waited, and even when he was giving the speech, he was fudging back and forth, to say who he'd picked. I don't know, I'm quite baffled by how much power Winston just seems to get, and even when we think he's gone, he's back again. How do you do that?
Keith, what should worry me more? That the GCSB will be able to spy on me, or that John Key appointed his childhood school chum to oversee the GCSB?
Well, I think the two things are linked in that the GCSB is going to be able to spy on New Zealanders much more. There's a whole lot of provisions, particularly in relation to looking into computers under the guise of cyber security. There's not much warrant system around that. They're able to record what they call incidentally obtained intelligence. So when they're filtering the mass of these communications that are coming down from Waihopai, etc., and then they put the selectors through them, and incidentally, they gather a lot of information on
So that's
people.
we didn't mean to find this out about you, but now that we do know, let's use it anyway.
Yeah, that's a big thing in this bill, you see. The NSA has a similar provision, and they're filtering sort of billions of emails and incidentally coming up with quite a lot of information.
Julie, when you consider how vested the National Party's interests are with big oil and corporations, can we honestly rule out that the Prime Minister wouldn't use these new powers to spy on his political opponents? Won't it be the environmental activists, human rights activists, anti-corporate activists, Māori rights activists and unions who will have these powers used against them?
Yeah, I think that's something of major concern. And the lack of oversight at the moment, I mean, we've seen all these bungles by GCSB and the SIS, and yet, there doesn't seem to be taken seriously the idea that we could change the oversight mechanism, that it shouldn't all rest on the Prime Minister. It's too much power for one person, whether they're National or Labour
GCSB has had their budget increased by 250% over the last decade. You combine it with the SIS, it's now over $100 million a year. Why is it that we as taxpayers don't seem to know what the bloody hell's going on for that $100 million?
And I think that's one of the really key things, is that we've been given no real reason or justification either for these law changes or for the urgency around these law changes either. It's unacceptable in a democracy.
It's a lot of money to be spent
well,
I'm not sure
if
what
they aren't
hell.
spying on domestic activists, who are they spying on?
Yes.
Because we've never come up with a terrorist in the last 50 years,
Well, all the
apart
terror
from the French
acts,
government and the Israeli government.
Yeah, that's right. External
And
bloody
the
terrorists.
blowing up of the
and
trades
we-
hall,
And we know that the police have had agents in activist groups.
That's right.
A case came up a couple of years
That's
ago.
right, yeah.
And there's a big argument in Britain at the present time about a group called the National Domestic Extremism Unit in the British Police that has a database of 9,000 Britons, animal rights activists, etc. They're in different categories. We know that, and it's quite easy for the GCSB, for example, to put in what they call a selector, deep sea drilling, for example. And then filter the stuff from Waihopa about international phone calls with that filter and come up with various Greenpeace communications and then
Are
whatever.
Greenpeace, question both of you, are Greenpeace terrorists? Are they terrorists?
Not most of the time.
But under the GCSB legislation,
They
they
would
could be defined as a foreign organisation because
Yeah,
they're
that's
international,
right.
and therefore it's all.
Would Amnesty International fall into the same category?
Any theoretically even a subsidiary McDonald's or something like that.
I think
in
we
New
know it won't
Zealand.
be McDonald's. Is
But
it?
I think it's more likely Greenpeace would be spied on the McDonald's.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I'm just my.
Is that acceptable?
No.
Why do you think that it is that New Zealanders haven't gravitated to this issue? I mean, we got up and we're very angry about the idea of closing a legal loophole that stopped abusive parents from getting away with assaulting their kids in
That's
court,
right.
We were that's nanny state. Here we have effectively John Key turning the eye of Mordor upon everyone in New Zealand, and we don't complain about that. Why is that?
I think ultimately, and I think this is part of Labour's woes too, is that there's still a really high level of trust in John Key. I don't get it. I'm not the right person to ask about why that is, because I've never trusted him.
Well, he's got a certain degree of smarts, like this bit on the rail loop that we were discussing.
Yes.
Yep.
Link.
The link.
Link. He all of a sudden sort of Jerry Brownlee and Co are sort of getting away on us a bit.
We'll move on to that. Just finally, very quickly, both of you, Key claims that this isn't an expansion of powers, that it's an expansion of safeguards. Any snorts of derision at that?
It's not. It's an expansion of powers quite clearly, and it will be directed at innocent New Zealanders, because one of the statistics that came out from Ian Fletcher, Key's mate, was that of the 88 people spied upon, legal proceedings had been brought against none.
Wow,
now, who were
that's
they?
interesting, isn't it? Snort of derision?
Totally. And the whole reason that this law change is happening is because they were doing it illegally and now they have to make it legal. That's clearly an expansion of powers.
Thank you, panel. Moving on with issue 3 tonight, the government have announced a massive U-turn on funding the rail loop, and Len Brown is jumping for joy. But what's the devil in the detail? Julie, rumours are flying that Sky City pressed key on greenlighting the loop because there will be a stop on the loop for their casino. Is this more crony capitalism than civic leadership?
These details are quite worrying. We've got the delay in time as well, these kinds of things that we've got a lot more to see yet, and I'll be really reading the package closely tomorrow. But I think the stuff about Sky City, if you look at the metro in Paris, they have a stop for the Louvre. That makes sense.
Yes.
Because
it's a national treasure,
it's
right?
a national treasure. Well, it's an international treasure.
International national treasure.
Thousands of people go there every day.
And you'd expect
so that makes sense, right? Sky City, I don't think merits a stop of its own at all.
I'm not sure its pokey gambling den is really that much of a tourism attraction.
We could just put them on the trains. Then
would
you
make
wouldn't
it
need
easy,
a stop.
Wouldn't it? That would make it easy.
People forget to get off at their stop.
Is this a recognition from National that Wellington can't bully Auckland anymore?
Yeah, well, in this particular case, the Auckland business community, in a big majority, supported the rail link. And I think that was what twisted Key's arm in the end, even though Stephen Joyce and Jerry Brownlee, for ideological reasons, wanted to tough it out. They want to build the roads, stuff the rail, and etc., and they were denying the evidence in front of them. But the Auckland business community, I sensed that even as far back as 2008, when I was a transport spokesperson for the Greens, and we had a bit of a election rally down at the Britomart, and we got Christine Fletcher and the Heart of the City people and all the rest of it. And the business community, even that far, knew that they didn't want a dead stop at Britomart. They needed a loop, a rail loop.
Question to both of you. Let's be honest. This is still a band-aid that won't be in place until 2023, and it does bugger all for the North Shore. This has all the vision of a blind cyclops, surely.
Oh, I completely disagree. The rail link will enable a huge expansion in other rail lines, and importantly for my community, Avondale Southdown, which has always been 30 years away. Every year it's another 30 years away. And we just can't build that until we get the capacity in the system that the rail link will provide, and then we'll be able to have complete the rail service, so you can even have rail to the airport.
Is it enough?
There's a whole lot more rail to be built. The rail to the airport, the
Avondale Southdown.
Avondale
say it
to
with
Southdown.
me. Avondale Southdown.
That's been on the map since 1953.
That's
right.
It's breezing, isn't it?
And you can have an underground rail, under the sea railway to the North Shore as well. So these things can happen.
The link makes the capacity possible to do so much more.
If we were going to get real about public transport and its support in the city, what would you do as a grand plan? What's your vision? What would if cost wasn't the issue, where would we be going? What's the dream?
Well, I hesitate to say monorail because we all know that that's the kiss of death. But no, I think we've got to think about how this ties in with the unitary plan, and that idea that we need to create dynamic villages which do have more intensity of living, also more intensity of places to work, and that those will only work if we have good public transport routes and we do them around public transport nodes. That's really where we need to go. What
would you do if it was up to you?
I'd agree, and there's a whole lot of design things that need to go on around the railway stations, and the council needs to get more heavily involved.
A library in every railway station.
But the missing dimension of the whole transport system in Auckland is cycleways, really. They're very limited at this particular point of time, and to develop them, you've got to be bold. You've got to, in many cases, take the parking off one side of the road.
Right.
You'll have the shopkeepers and the residents screaming blue murder that they can't park on their side of the road. But that's the easiest way to do it. You just take the cars out one side, you put a two-way cycleway up those roads.
I would always make the main street of whatever little sort of city or town or borough, whatever their main street, I would make that car free and just allow it to be pedestrians and allow pedestrians to be able to take over those spaces. And I'd make the buses free. It makes no sense to not have buses free. Do you know that? And just allow me to go, because I catch a lot of public transport.
You do.
Do you know that Invercargill has Wi-Fi buses? Invercargill has Wi-Fi. We don't. We're supposed to be the lead city in the country. It's just, it gets me. Public transport fires me up. Folks, let's wrap the show with final word. Julie, your final word this week is?
My final word is really just amazing admiration and respect for Wendy Davis, the Texan Democratic Senator. Filibustered for close to 13 hours, just spoke on and on and on, couldn't go off topic, and the topic was abortion rights for women. She managed to get to a point thousands of people in the Senate House, around the Senate House, online supporting her, sending in testimony that she could read because she couldn't go off the topic, and she managed to get to the midnight deadline with a bit of help. And then the Republican senators decided to break the rules and take the vote after midnight. But that's now been overruled. So she and her supporters have done an amazing thing to support the rights of people with uteruses to control their own bodies. Fantastic.
What is it with Texas and wanting to tell women what they can do with their vaginas?
Well,
what is that? What is that?
It's particularly worrying because it's the second most populous state. And you know, there's a whole raft of stuff going on about women's bodies in the States at the moment, particularly around abortion, things like forced ultrasounds, which just makes me want to cross my legs.
Yes.
You know, there's just all sorts of awful things happening. And if we think we're a whole lot better off, we're not, because abortion is still a crime in New Zealand and we need to fix it.
Thank you very much, Keith. Your final word?
On another sort of popular, positive American note, I'd just like to pay tribute to Edward Snowden for what he's achieved and how he's shown up the limitations of the power of the American empire. That you know, they're yelling and screaming at Hong Kong and China and Russia and Ecuador and everyone else,
Cuba,
but it doesn't seem to be working. And you have people around the world, the great majority of the people in the world, cheering on Edward Snowden and hoping he'll find a safe haven and hoping he'll be able to give us much more of the information he has. Perhaps on New Zealand too, of the way this illegal or illegitimate spying is going on.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Julie. Ladies and gentlemen, to my final word, and it's a personal request from me this week. Next Thursday night, LifeWise is holding its annual fundraiser for the homeless, and I, along with dozens of other Aucklanders, are sleeping rough on the streets of Auckland for one night on July the 4th to raise funds for LifeWise. If you are able to donate any money to aid their work with the homeless, please go to lifewise.org.nz and click on the Big Sleep Out link and sponsor me. Thank you in advance. If you like tonight's show, please join our Citizen A Facebook site and connect with other like-minded new citizens, and follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook page. Thanks for watching, whānau. Good night, Aotearoa.
Supporting local content so you can see more of New Zealand on air.